Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for joining me for another episode in the Conversations with Alan series. I'm Alan Locher, and I'm the child of two Holocaust survivors. I created this series to have honest discussions about the rise of anti Semitism and hate, with high hopes that it leads to conversations that make us all think about our own place in shaping history and to inspire collective action to eradicate hate in all its forms. My guest this evening is Dr. Charles Asher Small, the founding director of the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. We will take a hard-hitting look at the series exposing the root causes of rising anti-Semitism across academia, presenting the evidence in no uncertain terms and deepening the ongoing conversation. Dr. Small attended the first United Nations conference ever held on anti-Semitism back in 2003, organized by Elie Weisel, who was a great scholar, a Nobel Peace Prize Laureate, and one of the most well-known Holocaust survivors, and UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. In 2004, the Institute was created after he was inspired by Elie Weisel. He started the Institute with the support of Dr. William Prusoff and Elie Weisel, who was the first president of the organization. Please help me welcome Dr. Charles Small to Conversations with Alan. Thank you for being here, Doctor.
Hi, Alan. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm honored to be here with you. Thank you.
Well, let's dive in. You have lectured throughout the world as an expert scholar on anti-Semitism at hundreds of universities, addressed the Australian, British, Canadian, Chilean, and Italian parliaments, various leading think tanks in China, India, Europe, and here in America. What led you down this path to be active on issues relating to human rights and speaking up about anti-Semitism?
It's a good question. So, I'm originally from Montreal, born in Montreal, where there's a strong, vibrant Jewish community. And I think the Jewish community is strong and vibrant in part because we were sort of the quintessential other. We were kind of discriminated against to some extent by the British and also by the French Catholics. So we were sort of stuck in the middle. And I think growing up in Quebec during the times of rising nationalism and xenophobia, my family, my grandparents were very much involved in the Jewish community and dealing with anti-Semitism. It was part of our DNA. So that led me to, I was the president of Hillel when I was a kid at McGill. I was the leader of the student struggle for Soviet Jewry. I went to Russia in 1983-84 to visit the refuseniks, including the Tanchuransky's family. In Canada, we helped to bring in refugees, Ethiopian Jewish refugees from Sudan before they were able to leave Ethiopia and Sudan to go to Israel. I was active on Indigenous issues in Canada, the rights of Indigenous people, and also, active in the anti-apartheid movement. I was the African National Congress Solidarity chairperson for many years fighting apartheid. So I really come from a social democratic, liberal human rights background and was, sort of forging issues of anti-Semitism throughout my life. And I was living and teaching in Israel, and I'll never forget, I went to good universities. I went to McGill and Oxford University, and I studied political science. And I never knew much about the Muslim Brotherhood. It's sort of a social movement that began in Egypt 100 years ago. I kind of heard about them, but I didn't really understand who they were. And in the mid-90s, when the internet was starting, I started getting access to Egyptian newspapers, and they were being translated into English for the first time over the internet. And I started reading about the Muslim Brotherhood and realized that the PLO and the leaders of the Palestinian National Liberation Movement came out of the Muslim Brotherhood, and that the Muslim Brotherhood essentially was a very narrow, I would even say, perversion of Islam combined with European genocidal anti-Semitism and Nazism. They believed in the protocols of the Elders of Zion. The protocols of the Elders of Zion, the lies that led to the Holocaust, was actually an integral part of their constitution and raison d'etre. It's not the rantings and ravings of the extreme wing or the military wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. but they really believe in furthering the goals of Nazism. The true, they preach that the true believer is obligated to finish the work of Hitler. So here I was, a liberal, peace kind of loving guy, two-state solution, ending apartheid, fighting for human rights. And I was reading how reactionary and anti-Semitic and racist the Muslim Brotherhood was and its offshoots of the PLO, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Iranian revolutionary regime. So this sort of led me on a path first of study and learning, and then later teaching and starting ISGAP as a center for scholars to really deal with this emerging crisis. Because with this global economic crisis, I think the Muslim Brotherhood and radical Islam is filling a vacuum in North Africa and the Middle East, and even in communities in Europe and North America.
Wow. Can you, there's a lot there. Can you take us back to that United Nations conference in 2003? What brought you there at the time? And, what are some of the, things you took away?
So, this was the first conference at the UN that dealt with anti-Semitism. So it took until 2003. Here was an institution born out of the ashes of the Holocaust, where, scholars after the Holocaust began to look at international law, the Convention on the Punishment and Prevention of Genocide. All this international law comes out of the ashes of the Holocaust. And it took Kofi Annan and Elie Weisel, to do the first conference on anti-Semitism. I knew Elie Wiesel to an extent. He had a sister in Montreal, and he would come to Montreal to visit regularly and often lecture at our synagogue in Montreal. So I kind of grew up reading his books and meeting him on occasion, or listening to him when I was a kid. I was listening to him. So through a mutual friend, I was invited to the conference, and there was a small group of professors there, as well as leading political figures from around the world. And I think the beginning of anti-Semitism as we know it today was sort of re-emerging, and there was a small group of scholars, there were like 5 of us, that thought we should do something, and we started ISGAP together with, with the support of Elie Wiesel, and as you said, William Prusoff, who was a professor at Yale and a philanthropist, and he helped to create ISGAP with us.
So when you say 2003, is that when there was sort of this reawakening of anti-Semitism?
Yeah, I think so. And I remember in 2003, Elie Wiesel spoke at the Canadian Parliament, and I was there with him. And I remember him saying that we're living, with the reemergence of anti-Semitism, we were living in a time of great urgency. And then he corrected himself to say, we're not living in a time of great urgency, we're living in a time of a great emergency. And this was 21 years ago. And we know from 2003 to 2024, especially after October the 7th, that the world is a different place, that we've entered into an era of just, naked, open anti-Semitism and Jew hatred, and anti-democratic politics in our universities and on our streets. But I think as scholars, we began to see economic and social and political processes from around the world leading to conditions that were ripe for extremism and anti-Semitism.
Was there something that happened in 2003, or it was just
No, I
things?
think the thing that really shook the world was the Durban conference. If you remember, there was a conference on racism in Durban, South Africa. It was soon after the end of apartheid, 7 or 8 years after the apartheid. And this was an international gathering of the United Nations and international organizations and NGOs from around the world. Many thousands of people attended this conference to end racism in Durban, South Africa, free South Africa, after the end of apartheid with Nelson Mandela there. And it turned into essentially an anti-Semitic, anti-Israel orgy. The PLO and other Islamist organizations really, this was August 2001. It really became a hate fest against Jews. And just, less than 2 weeks later, September the 11th happened. So this was sort of maybe, a time, after this period where we entered into this period of growing or the reemergence of genocidal anti-Semitism.
Wow. Yeah. And speaking up is so important. I mean, I didn't have this platform in 2017 when Charlottesville happened, but, thinking of my parents, possibly they were no longer alive when Charlottesville happened, but the thought of them watching that and seeing that vitriol 75 years after the war really just shook me.
Yeah. Where were your parents from, if I may ask?
Both of my parents were Holocaust survivors from Amsterdam, from Holland.
Huh. Yeah. No, I'm thinking, from October the 7th, also,
Yes,
in a
I
way.
mean that's a whole other story of what that would have done
Yeah.
immensely. But I mean, I was excited to see in the New York Times today that they're finally opening a Holocaust museum in Amsterdam for the first time
Good. Yeah.
to
Nice.
deal with, that. Can you speak about the current rise that we're seeing? What you were seeing prior to October 7th and what you feel we've seen since October 7th?
Yeah. So I think one of my main messages, especially, I won't go into details of dealing with people in the Jewish community in the past few days. I think the Jewish community needs to be strong and united. Strong and united. And there are people in our community um, who I think identify as Republican or identify as Democrat, and that's fine. But there's really a crisis, and I think people on the left need to call out anti-Semitism on the left, and people on the right need to call out anti-Semitism on the right. And we really need to be strong. There is an attack on the democratic center from the extreme left and the extreme right, and from political Islam. And I think there's a tendency for progressive Jewish people to call out the anti-Semitism associated with white supremacy and nationalism, and as you said, Charlottesville and Trump and MAGA, which is great. But equally, we need to call out the disgusting anti-Semitism of the squad, of the radical elements in the Democratic Party, and among progressive or intellectuals that parade themselves as progressives. Just a few days ago, Judith Butler, who is a very highly respected thinker and intellectual of great importance globally. She's a Jewish woman, a gay Jewish woman, and a professor with an incredible career. She's at Berkeley, California. And she just spoke in support of Hamas. Several years ago, she said that we have to understand Hamas and Hezbollah as part of the progressive global left. And just 2 days ago, you would think, after the barbarism of the massacres and mutilations and sexual abuse in southern Israel, that she would reconsider her twisted position. But no, she doubled down and she is in support of Hamas, and we should understand Hamas's action as part of an armed conflict because of the occupation. And this type of aiding and abetting barbarians by our professors and by leaders at universities is really something that we need to call out. The fact that, in these famous hearings in the Congress a few months ago, which was the most watched congressional hearings in history, where you have three presidents at the pinnacle of their career, at the top of their career, at the best universities in the world, were unable to condemn the fact that members of their institution were calling for the extermination of other members of their institution, of Jewish faculty and Jewish students, reflects a philosophical and political moment on the left among intellectuals at our best institutions of higher education that is repugnant, that is dangerous. And I've also attended some progressive symposiums at Columbia University and NYU in the last few months just to listen. And I heard some of the most brilliant professors and brilliant doctoral students at two of the finest universities in this country, if not the world. These were scholars steeped in philosophy and social sciences. They were brilliant, fluent in their subject matter. And they were arguing that the occupation, Israel, not the disputed territories or the occupied territories, Israel is occupied. All of the land of Israel, or I should say Palestine, is occupied by the Zionists, and that by all means we have to end the occupation. And then they justified the brutality, they justified the murder, they justified that children were killed in front of their parents and parents killed in front of their children, that women were raped and mutilated, and they blamed the Jews for this because the Jews were there, and that because it's moral and right to struggle and use by any means necessary to end the occupation, it was the victims' fault for being there. They caused the violence. So if you think about it, we have intellectuals in our midst, and important intellectuals in our best universities making this argument. This argument, philosophically and intellectually and at a scholarly level, means the calling for the murder of Jewish people. The United States of America, one of the most important democracies on the planet, if not the most democracy on the planet, have at its institutions of higher education is perhaps the most important institution in our country because this is where young Americans learn to be citizens. They are trained to be our future professors, our journalists, our leaders in government, our leaders of industry, and they are being taught to kill Jews or to justify the killing of Jewish people. So Americans, Democrats, Republicans, Jewish people of all stripes, of all backgrounds, of all political backgrounds or ethnic backgrounds, need to realize that this is a threat not only to the Jewish people, but this is a threat to basic democratic principles. And we can see on October the 7th, there was a massacre in Israel. On October the 9th, when we went back to our universities and we met our classmates and we met our colleagues in the faculty room, we were met with an explosion of not only anti-Semitism, an explosion of anti-democratic politics, of aggressive, threatening politics of anti-Semitism and supporting radical Islam at these liberal institutions. It boggles the mind. And we need leadership in our community, our rabbis, our intellectuals, the leaders of the ADLs and the AJCs, not to tolerate this anymore. We have to call upon our government leaders to put an end to this. It's really a threat, not just to the Jewish people, it's a threat to our democratic principles.
I mean, it's something else. I mean, for years, your organization has warned that money from the Middle East has been sort of entering higher ed and fermenting this spread. What
Absolutely.
initially prompted that warning in higher ed? Like, where did you see it? And
So we started this project in 2012. In 2019, we presented in Washington to the head of the FBI, Homeland Security, the Attorney General was there, the Secretary of Education was there, sort of top 100 government officials. It was a summit on anti-Semitism. At that time, we found 3 billion with a B dollars coming from the Muslim Brotherhood. This is the organization that calls not only for the destruction of the state of Israel, but the murder of Jews around the world. That we found $3 billion in Muslim Brotherhood money coming to American universities and not being reported to the Department of Education as required by law. We presented our research. This led to a federal investigation. The investigation went on for about 8 months, and the government found 18 billion with a B dollars in money coming from the Muslim Brotherhood, from Russia, China, and other foreign entities, and it wasn't being declared as required by the law. This enabled us, I guess, our minor success. We were able to expand our research. Now we have a team of terror finance experts, forensic accountants, experts in the Muslim Brotherhood, and we're sort of mapping the network of hate that we call it. The Qatari government has a bayah. A bayah is a spiritual oath to the Muslim Brotherhood. They adhere to all the religious rulings and edicts of this reactionary ideology. There's less than 350,000 citizens in Qatar. They give more money to American universities than all the countries in the world, more than Europe, more than the United Kingdom, more than Canada. So here you have this tiny country giving, we found almost $100 billion in funds coming from this country. They are obviously transforming higher education. And you can see they're supporting Students for Justice in Palestine, which is also an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. We call them the shock troops on campus to make life difficult for Jewish students and faculty. And maybe even more terrifying is the support for professorships and research centers, which is transforming education. And I can just give you, one example is that the Jewish people, we were murdered, systematically murdered in the Holocaust because we were perceived as not white and poisoning the purity of the white Aryan race. So we have to be eliminated. Less than 2 generations, I call them clowns, but these professors at our best universities are saying that the Jews are white. And it's not that we're white, welcome to the club, and we're very sorry for what happened to you during the Holocaust. No. In less than 2 generations, we've become white, and we have become the embodiment of white racism, white supremacy, occupation, apartheid, colonialism, genocide, and fascism and Nazism. Pretty good in 2 generations. This discourse is directly related to the Muslim Brotherhood supporting our universities in the tune of tens of billions of dollars. So could you imagine, you talk about Charlottesville, could you imagine if there was a white supremacist state like South Africa or Germany that existed with 350,000 citizens, and they were giving tens of billions of dollars to American universities? And instead of Students for Justice in Palestine, who parade around campus with COVID masks and kafirs, hiding their identities and chanting genocidal slogans against Jewish people, that they were white, the White Youth League with white robes and hoods parading around our university calling for the extermination of Jews and other racial minorities. We wouldn't tolerate that. We wouldn't tolerate it for a moment. But when it comes to calling for the murder of Jewish people, our institutions of higher education have failed us, and they continue to fail us. It's business as usual. These universities ultimately are corporations, and they're taking money hand over fist from people and regimes that are anti-democratic, and they're using anti-Semitism to weaken the United States of America.
Wow, that is scary.
It is. It really is.
Wow. You were talking about the hearings back in December, but one of your papers, "The Corruption of the American Mind," was submitted and cited twice during those during the House committee on that. What did you think of those hearings and the outcome? I mean, I know the one president resigned.
Yeah, look, I think in a way, it was a blessing. So our research, we were able to give our research to some of the congressional leaders, and they read it, so they were prepared. And I think our work helped to set the stage for some of the questions that were asked. And I think due to the stupidity of the universities who were advising the presidents of the universities, who are accomplished, serious thinking women, I suspect they were told by their lawyers to read prepared statements, and they looked ridiculous. They made a tremendous mistake. And maybe it's a blessing in the long run that they looked like corporate leaders from the tobacco industry, 50 years ago, that were saying that cancer, cigarettes don't cause cancer.
Right.
And they look kind of the same. So I think
that is a great analogy, but you're right.
So I think we got lucky, and now this became an issue. I think anti-Semitism at American universities, people now finally realize that it's a problem. And I think people are beginning to question, money coming in from anti-democratic, anti-Semitic, sexist, homophobic regimes that are giving money to our universities hand over fist. And of course, they're buying influence. They're using their power, their soft power, to have influence in America. So I think finally it's an issue, and it's, more people are doing research on it, more journalists are covering it. The Jewish community finally is aware that we really do have a problem, whether you support the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, or if you're right wing or left wing. There is a consensus that there's a problem, which is a blessing. I guess in every crisis, there's opportunities. So now that there's an awareness, I hope we can begin to fight for change.
And are you doing that through the Institute, trying to initiate change?
Absolutely. We run a small research center in Cambridge in the United Kingdom. We do programs at Oxford University. We train professors. If anybody is interested, we have a digital research center. We have online courses and seminar series. In English, we run programs in French, in Arabic, in Spanish. We're doing one now in German. So it's a vibrant research center. We have 60 research fellows with us from all over the world. And we're carrying out research projects in addition to the Follow the Money project. So yeah, it's a vibrant center with people from different perspectives, different parts of the world that are sort of unpacking this contemporary problem of anti-Semitism.
The report mentions, specifically Texas A&M putting the U.S. at risk. Can you talk about that? And I assume it's not just Texas A&M.
Yeah, so very quickly, we have 5 reports that we've published. One on the ideology of Qatar, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Hamas. The leadership of Hamas lives an opulent life as we speak in Qatar. Hamas has been given billions of dollars from Qatar. They give money to Cornell, to Georgetown, to Texas A&M, to all these American universities, and they're funding the war, the Hamas soldiers at the same time. It's ludicrous. Imagine Qatar is funding massacres of innocent Jewish people, and American universities take their money. It boggles the mind. So we show this link. We also did a project on how it's changing, affecting scholarly discourse. We've mapped their financial network. Our forensic accountants have found, our terror financing experts estimate that their financial network is worth $1 trillion. It's a lot of money. We did a report on Yale University showing that Yale is still not reporting money that they receive to the Department of Education. We have a big report coming out on Cornell. We found nearly $2 billion in money that went from Qatar to Cornell. And as you mentioned, the Texas A&M report, we have 2 volumes of our report now. And we uncovered a contract between the Qatari regime and Texas A&M. And we found that the contract is worth $1.3 billion. And Qatar owns all of the intellectual property rights for over 502 research projects that we found, which is unusual. We've now defined 57 of these research projects as potential dual use for military and even nuclear research. And we've called upon the American government, the federal government, to investigate, the relationship that Texas A&M has with Qatar and the nature of the research. We're worried that this technology, which is now owned by Qatar, could be transferred. They have good relations with Iran, with the Iranian Revolutionary Regime. They have good relations with the Taliban. So we hope that this technology is not going to be shared with our enemies. So we're calling for transparency. And a few weeks ago, which was wonderful, the regents which oversee and govern Texas A&M, they voted 7-1 to close the campus in Qatar, which is wonderful. And we hope that other American universities like Georgetown, Cornell, George Washington, Carnegie Mellon will also close their campus in this Muslim Brotherhood run, anti-democratic, sexist, homophobic, terror financing nation.
For anybody who's watching this now, who might watch this later, to parents who have children at some of these schools and universities that you're mentioning, What can they do, or what would you say to them?
I think that they should be appalled. First of all, that these corporations that parade themselves as universities have a relationship with anti-American, anti-democratic regimes. That's number one. And number two, they should be outraged. They're paying a lot of money, and disproportionately, it seems that Jewish students are not getting the same level of funding that other students get. But that's a whole other issue. That these parents that you refer to are spending a lot of money. They're really, it's difficult to get into these universities, and it's difficult to ensure that their children, you know, could afford to go there. It's an investment in their future, but it's a painful investment. Parents really sacrifice to put their kids through schools, especially these Ivy League expensive private universities. And to spend all this money in a space that must be safe, a space where young people learn to be citizens, where young people explore, debate, and argue civilly about ideas, and meet people from different communities and different walks of life and different ways of life. This is, 4 years that are supposed to be, extraordinarily beautiful, where people learn all sorts of things in the classroom and among their peers out of the classroom. This should be a safe, wonderful space. And instead, a lot of these universities that are getting money from Qatar have become spaces where, as we speak, faculty members and students fear, not just for getting the credits and getting their degrees or getting a job and getting, tenure or advancement in their career. These are people that are now worried about, in some cases, their physical safety at these spaces because of the calls for genocide that the leaders of the university fail repeatedly to condemn. So I think parents should be outraged. I'm not a lawyer, but I don't know if there's class action suits. I know some students and faculty are suing universities. But I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know if everybody has that type of recourse. But at the very least, this is something that should not be tolerated against any group. If women were treated this way, if African Americans were treated this way, if gay people were treated this way, could you imagine if any of these groups were being subjected to calls for their extermination, and the leaders of these universities that receive tens of thousands of dollars in tuition from these parents don't say anything? But when it comes to Jews, this is the case. It's really outrageous. And as a community, we cannot tolerate this. We really need to organize and fight against this.
That is an understatement. Last week, I believe the House Education Committee held a roundtable to discuss anti-Semitism with 9 students. Did you get to see any of that?
Yeah, I watched it on video, on tape, and yeah, there were amazing young people who really took a
I
stand.
didn't get to watch, and I would like to, but it was 9 students who I think who have been on the receiving end of
Yeah,
anti-Semitism.
absolutely. I have to say that the young people are at the front line. Universities, and I'm choosing my words carefully as a scholar. There's a war against the Jewish people. There is a war against the Jewish people, which is being waged in the United States of America, and the universities are the front line in this war. And young Jewish kids are incredible, and they're standing up, and they're taking a stand, and they're fighting back, and they're speaking out, and we should applaud them, and we should support them. And I think the adults in the room, the professors, the leaders of Jewish organizations, lawyers, parent organizations, they should be supporting these young, brilliant kids, you know, without it, completely. But we have to remember the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood in Qatar is alive and well in this sort of postmodern moment in our universities. The people who are funding our education are the people who are funding the kinetic warfare against Israel out of Gaza, against Israel out of Lebanon, against Israel out of Iran, against Israel out of South Africa. This is Qatar is funding, aiding, and abetting all of this, and we need to take a stand. We need to call upon the United States government to end their relationship with this tyrannical, reactionary regime. We need to empower in the regime moderate Muslims, proud Muslims who practice Islam in a more authentic way, in a way that respects difference and respects their neighbors. And there are many. We should not be tolerating this relationship, even though Qatar is capable of paying everybody a lot of money to work with them.
It's overwhelming to some degree.
It is, but we're a strong community and we are a strong country. This country is the strongest country on the planet. Democracy is always stronger than tyranny, but we always have to safeguard democracy. Thomas Jefferson taught us that in every generation, we have to strengthen our democratic practices and strengthen our democratic institutions. And when our most sensitive democratic institution, higher education, is taking money from anti-democratic, tyrannical regimes, it's a problem, and it needs to stop. These are people that didn't allow women to study. People they have good relations with the Taliban.
They
Women
would
in
chop
Afghanistan
my
they can't go to school.
they would chop my head off for being gay.
Yes, they continue. Hamas kills gay people in Gaza. They kill gay people in Iran. They kill gay people in Qatar. And then, these postmodern progressive intellectuals and people like Judith Butler, who's Jewish, feminist, and gay, supports them.
That really does.
It boggles
That's
the mind.
mind blowing.
Yeah.
That is mind blowing. I would, from your research and from listening to you, is this the biggest threat surrounding anti-Semitism, because it is starting with our young people?
Absolutely. Look, the Muslim Brotherhood is using Qatar they're using soft power to influence higher education. Ideas go down through the university system and through K through 12. We can see this ideology in our media of record. We can see this ideology seeping into the halls of government in the Congress and in the Senate and in state institutions. It's happening now more and more in the private sector. 2 weeks ago, I was in New York City and I met a group of 40 young Jewish Americans in their 30s. They were brilliant. They were in high tech, in law. They were screenwriters from Hollywood, people in publishing, kind of all in the private sector. And they were explaining, what they're going through in terms of anti-Semitism. And it was shocking. I thought it was still in the education system and maybe in the media, but it's really permeated now all of American society. And, I met a young kid. He was 32 years old, born in Morocco, grew up in Paris. His family left Morocco because of anti-Semitism. Then they left Paris because of anti-Semitism to the United States. He's 32 years old. He started a high-tech company. He has 300 employees. A genius, successful, brilliant. And he was saying to me, like, where do we go? That, his company is being affected by anti-Semitism in the private sector. So, yeah, this is a serious moment in our time, and we have to, stand strong and come together and fight for democratic principles, equality of all citizens under one legal system.
That's for sure.
And we can't be in bed with people who want to destroy our democracy, and they're using anti-Semitism to weaken America. The Jews in Israel are the little Satan. The United States is the big Satan. These are not friends of the United States. And Elie Weisel always preaches that anti-Semitism begins with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. And you can see these thugs on the streets of New York, on the streets of Montreal, on the streets of Toronto, in Los Angeles and Chicago, in Paris and London, harassing people, abusing the police, abusing students, abusing people on the streets, targeting Jewish shops. In Montreal 2 nights where I'm from, A Jewish community center was overwhelmed by aggressive protesters. They had to smuggle the people out of an event in a Jewish community center. And when the protesters heard that the Jews were leaving the center, or not just Jews, but the people were leaving the center and the event, they started chanting that they're leaving like rats, and that this city, Montreal, should not have rats in it. I grew up there. Montreal is a multicultural, intercultural, vibrant city. And they're calling Jews rats, and they're calling to get rid of the rats. This is what we've been reduced to. And, this is a.
I remember shortly after October 7th at Columbia, that student organization you mentioned basically not letting students out of a building. Like they were, they were barricaded in.
That's SJP, the Students for Justice in Palestine, which is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. And after October the 7th, that group said that we don't support Gaza, we don't support the Palestinians, we don't support Hamas. We are Hamas. We are the struggle. They are supporting a terror organization that has hostages that are American. And it's unbelievable, really.
You said earlier, people should speak up, but there's a parent asking specific things. I mean, is it writing to universities? Is it joining a specific organization that they could?
Look, I think, it's a good question. I think there's an ecosystem of individuals and organizations in the United States fighting anti-Semitism. I think ISGAP has a small piece of the ecosystem. We provide high quality education. We map and decode anti-Semitism, contemporary anti-Semitism. So we provide reports and research and programming. Everybody's welcome to attend. So we provide knowledge. And I think with that knowledge, parents should demand from their universities to cut off ties with Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood, to end student organizations that call for the support of terrorism and terror organizations. There are some universities in the country that have basically outlawed that. If any student supports a terror organization, they'll be kicked off campus, they'll be expelled. MIT was going to suspend students, but then they realized some of the students they were suspending are foreign students, and if they're suspended and don't go to class, they'll lose their visa. If they lose their visa, they can't give MIT the tuition for a foreign student. So they took money over the security of Jewish students. They took money over what a liberal education is really about. Tragic. So I think parents should demand that universities adhere to democratic principles and liberal education, and to stop acting simply as a greedy corporation, but more of an entity, an institution providing a liberal education.
And the Institute works with all the organizations?
Yeah, our material is disseminated widely, and we appear in similar programs and conferences around the world. And we work with different organizations. We work with, as you were saying earlier, with different governments. We have good working relations in the Vatican. We work with the Muslim World League, which is an education organization that is at the forefront of reforming. It used to be the Muslim Brotherhood controlled the Muslim World League. It's one of the most important Sunni organizations in the world. It's being run by a gentleman named Muhammad Alisa, who's really a reformer. We work with moderate Muslims to have rapprochement and understanding with Jews and Muslims. So there's some wonderful things happening. But what's happening in our education system is really horrible, and we should stand up to it.
Dr. Small, thank you so much for being here and doing this research. And I mean, it really, sucks that, you started this in 2004 and it's even worse today. The hope is that it would get better.
I think the Chinese say, in every crisis, there's an opportunity. This is our opportunity as a community of people, of Jewish people and people who believe in democracy, to take a stand and to fight back. And we can do it.
Well, and we need to do it for our Jewish community, and we need to do it for the United States of America as well.
Absolutely. And for our children and our grandchildren.
Yeah.
You know, and the Soviet Jews stood up to the Soviet system and became free. If they can do it, we can do it. It's an easier task. Let's do it.
Please stay in touch. Thank you so much for the time and for sharing this
Thank you.
with
Pleasure.
everybody.
I'll just say our website is www.isgap.org, and you can attend seminars, programming, read our material. A lot of our books and reports are for free.
And the link is up on YouTube for anybody watching. It's down below. You can click the link as well to go directly to ISGAP.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Doctor. Have a great evening.
You too. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Same to you. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. As I leave you, remember, we all have choices to make in life. Speak up, do the hard thing, and let's all fight hate for good. I truly believe conversations like this can change the world around us. Please feel free to share these episodes with your friends and family. Until the next conversation, please stay safe.